A very, very good afternoon and warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, brought to you by Norman Goodfellows. And if I am looking a little flustered at the moment, well, it's a combination of two things. The Dimension Data Pro-Am, which finished yesterday, home last night after a wonderful few days. You will have seen the show from the event on Thursday with Nina Marie Bruer, who is a former winemaker, now heading up the marketing team at Bosch & Dahl, with some great insights into how they are taking premium to scale and trying to get the Bosch & Dahl brand in particular into that kind of Penfold space, that Antinori space, where you've got wine at a more approachable level, but you've also got some really top-end stuff and are able to carry both of those ends of the spectrum under the same brand. Fascinating talking to Nina Marie, and quite good fun drinking some of her wine as well. The other reason for being a little flustered is half an hour of trying to do grade 4 maths homework with my daughter. I'm afraid grade 4 maths is the upper level of my mathematical ability, and this is probably the last year Daddy is allowed to do homework. So wine is a far more comfortable space, and it's one I jump into today with great excitement because one of my dear friends in the wine industry produced yet another brilliant article, as she has a habit of doing on a regular basis, this time at the end of last year for Decanter, on a grape that really has soared into the spotlight over the course of the last few vintages. It's a grape that was often either hidden in the background with Cabernet Sauvignon as a blend, particularly in the 1970s, think the Chateau Libertas of the time or others, and otherwise it just never really got super amounts of attention as something that could hold its own without any support. But over the last few years, Cinsault has changed. And in South Africa, we are now finding some masterful examples of wines that combine both that softness of touch and gentle elegance with some red fruit that, while delicate, is certainly not shy and retiring, and produces a wine that, especially in summer with a 10-12 minute trip to the fridge, has become a go-to for so many people, and myself amongst them. So today on the show, we find out from Malu how Cinsault has made this transition, how it's leapt up the ranks to become one of South Africa's premium red offerings when made by the kind of people who also join us on the show, because we will have, in no particular order, Lukas van Loggerenberg, a master of Cinsault, join us. Lucinda Heyns will be joining us, and Donovan Rall, the big West Coast Viking, completing 3 winemakers for whom Cinsault has become more than just something they do rather well. I sense there's a great deal of passion behind their involvement with this particular grape. So that is today's show on Dan Really Likes Wine with Norman Goodfellows, the Joy of Cinsault, and what joy it does bring indeed. Before we do that, though, let's find out. It's a busy, busy, busy time of the year, led by harvest. Plenty happening in the wine world. Let's have a quick look at some of the headlines. This is the Black Elephant Vintners, Raymond and Lovu and team. This is something I haven't seen before, but I'm not entirely surprised, because if you've seen any of the digital marketing from Raymond and Jacques and co, they do things like make videos of the 3 of them in the bath, and not in a Ricky Gervais, please hold my drink, I'm appalled kind of way, but in just loads of fun and we think our wine is too kind of way, which leads to their silent disco. So there will be the headphones in place for music and wine. This is Tuesday, the 19th of March. It is at the Norman Goodfellows Superstore in Four Ways, and as always, it promises to be a terrific night. The Black Elephant wine, headlined by some really good bubbles. That Black Elephant Zero Dosage, closest I came to a dry January, is excellent, and there are many others that are just as good. So I think you're in for a terrific night. It's 100 Rand to get in. All 100 of that goes to a local charity. It's more just to make sure you have signed up and you do come along, and there'll be snacks as well through the evening. Great chance to have some fun with the silent disco, but also meet the Black Elephant team, and if you haven't already, discover their wine. Well, then the Cup Classique Festival. This is Darielle Robertson in full flight once again. She's going to be back up in Johannesburg in the middle of May. This is the Ananda Polo Club, and I think she's structured it quite nicely this year in terms of the timing. It's either Friday evening, now being Johannesburg. This is 6 o'clock when people stop work, as opposed to 11 o'clock if you live somewhere like Noordhoek. And this means you've got a Friday night to enjoy. Alternatively, it is Saturday from 11 until 4. And what's been really good about this over the last few years is that while you will recognize a number of the brands, there always seem to be 2 or 3 new ones that have crept under the radar, just arriving. Last year, it was a number of very exciting young Black-owned brands who had made an impact and sat alongside not just some of the great Cup Classiques of South Africa, but some of the great champagne houses as well. Web Tickets has your tickets. Get them quickly. They sold out at high speed last year, so don't come and blame us if you don't have them. That is 18 of May at Inanda. And Caroline Martin. I love Caroline Martin. She's one of the 812 Finlaysons who work in the South African wine industry. And together with JC out at Creation, they've done so much to innovate, not just from a wine perspective. What they've done with the Pebbles project and social development is every much as eye-catching and arguably even more meaningful. This, though, was one that encapsulates all that they do, bringing the food, the wine, the welcome, the celebration of creation together. The 2024 Vidor Award for Best Brand Experience. If you've been to Creation, then you'll know that this is well-deserved. The food pairing is sensational. JC's wines, headlined by the Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, but certainly not exclusive, are just terrific. But it's also that warmth of welcome, that introduction you get. And quite often there'll be JC or Caroline around when they're not abroad collecting awards. And they just add on top of that to the wonderful time you're set to have. If you haven't done Creation, it must be on that wine bucket list. And this is another reason why. And then Ruben Riffel joining the MSC. It's difficult to say the name of this boat without slipping into an Afrikaans accent and sounding unprintable. Anyway, MSC have got Ruben Riffel for their 2024 World Cruise, and he is going to be on board and cooking up a storm. Ruben is now, well, he's royalty in South African cooking. And I know that Ross Volk, who was actually playing golf with me over the weekend down at the Data, is very excited with the MSC team to have Ruben on. It's a great accolade for Ruben, but I think it's a great accolade for MSC as well. And he'll be joining the MSC ship for that 2024 World Cruise. Good work, Ruben. Nicely done. And then the Marathi Harvest Festival. This is 16-17 March, so about a month to go. 250 rand a person. And as you can see from the bottom, everything from grapes, stomping and walks through the vineyards to live music and cheese platters, and unsurprisingly, a fair bit of wine tasting. I was at Marathi just a few weeks ago for the Cape Wine Auction. It is a lovely spot in a great corner of Stellenbosch. They make some terrific wine, but it's more than just the wine. It's the full experience. 250 rand. That's just about giving it away. 16-17 March for a harvest event for your diary. And then finally, one of my favorite people in wine, Ina Smith. Happy birthday to the woman who, along with Ken Forrester, for me, always just screams out Chenin Blanc in South Africa. She recently stepped down as the head of the Chenin Blanc Association, or general manager or CEO, or basically just person who made it work. But she's still very involved. Recently was in Europe doing some stuff in Paris, I think, last week. She's a real force of nature, a wonderful, wonderful ambassador for not just Chenin, for South African wine as a whole, and somebody who I suspect today is already several bottles of Chenin happily down. Happy birthday, Ina Smith. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for everything that you do for South African wine. Right, there we go. I told you it is a busy time in the wine industry. We haven't even talked about Harvest other than that Marathi festival. We will, though, touch on Harvest with all three of our winemakers who join us today. And they join us for a show I've wanted to do for a little while. I was talking to Malu about this end of last year, about the rise of Cinsault. And it's part of this great South African expansion where there's so many wines we're making so well. We almost don't know what to settle on, what to stick to, because the potential is just immense. And the potential of Cinsault has finally been realized, at least in the way that it should have been. So I'm really excited to talk about the grape, discover a bit more of it, and find out from our winemakers what makes it so special for them, and for our intergalactic global young wine writer of the millennium, why she is so fond of this particular one. So a very, very warm welcome to Malu Lambert, who joins us on the show once again. Warm welcome to Lukas van Loggerenberg. I think we have Donovan Rall joining us very shortly. If he's not, no, he's on his way, so I'll have him shortly. And then to Lucinda Heyns. Guys, welcome to all of you. Lovely to have you on the show, and lovely to have you to celebrate this particular occasion, this particular grape, because it's one, Malu, I think we've had quite a few conversations about. This was a bit like Chenin not that long ago, where it wasn't really seen in terribly impressive light. It was hidden in a blend here or there, or made rather cheaply. But in the last few years, this has gone stratospheric, and Cinsault has changed entirely, thanks to people like Lucinda and Lukas and Donovan, who'll be joining us shortly. What for you has been the catalyst to that? What's taken this rather humble grape and turned it into something of an aristocrat?
So first of all, I want to change the name of your show. I want to call it Living in Sin. I think that's just, a little catchier. So the main thing that's changed with Cinsault is the quality of winemakers who are drawn to it. So you have the likes of Andrea Malinu, Donovan Rall, Lukas van Loggerenberg, Lucinda, etc., and Irben Sadi, who released the debut vintage of Pofadder in 2009. And that was the big moment where it was like, whoa, Cinsault is something to contend with. So that was a big moment, and it kind of ignited the fine wine emergence of Cinsault. So it's the kind of people interested in it, and it's also the fact that we have some old vine plots. In fact, our two oldest red wine vineyards in the country are both Cinsault. The oldest is the Besson vineyard in Wellington, which Andrea makes her wine from, and the Lotte vineyard, which Lukas makes his vineyard from. So they're the two oldest registered red wine vineyards in the country. A lot of the Cabernet, etc., gives way to leaf roll virus, and it's not as long lived. So unfortunately though, for Cinsault, you can't really make fine wine from young vines, and that's its downfall. So as exciting as this all is, and I mean, for this tasting, I tasted over 80 premium bottlings of Cinsault, narrowed it down to 30. But it's plantings are dwindling, unfortunately, because it's a difficult guy to grow, and farmers don't generally want to put in the money to wait 30 years for Cinsault to make a premium wine out of it. So we have the good and the bad here. Yes, our premium bottlings are grabbing attention, but sadly, there isn't enough of it, actually.
So we're not going to have absolutely massive volumes of it, but we are going to have some really, really good wine at last, because it's taken us quite some time. Now, understand that we needed vines to get old, but we have had some Cinsault vines that have been around for a long time. As you say, the two oldest red wine vines in the country are Cinsault. So why do you think it took us quite so long as a wine producing country to discover just what a gem we had in Cinsault?
Well, again, it needed a front runner, right? Just like Chenin Blanc was disregarded for so long. The difference between Chenin and Cinsault is that Chenin can pretty much grow anywhere and grows very well and can make fine wine, not just from old vines. So Chenin is definitely the South African star. But what I enjoy about both wines is that they're distinctly South African. There's nowhere else in the world making old vine Cinsault like we are. Nobody else in the world. It's a hallmark, and it's defining of South Africa. So when you ask what is it, it needs a personality like Ken Forrester and Chenin Blanc. We had Irben Sadi championing this grape, and that's what put it in the spotlight.
We've got two and hopefully three, if Donovan can escape his harvest today, to join us winemakers who've made terrific Cinsault. And Malu, I'll ask you in a moment to introduce for you why these guys have done it so well. But first, let's get their broader thoughts. Lucinda, lovely to have you on the show and a very warm welcome. You are very much part of this upsurge in interest and delivery of great South African Cinsault. When did the grape first catch your eye, and what is Cinsault's magic for you as a winemaker?
Mute. Hi, Dan. Thank you. So I started making Cinsault in 2015. That was my first vintage. And it's actually interesting because back then I literally went out and bought all the Cinsauts that I could find on the shelf because I just wanted to kind of taste what was out there. And at that time, I could only find 15 single varietal Cinsauts that were bottled. And I'm pretty sure that if you look in the Platter Guide now, it will probably be close to 100, if not more. Maybe Malu has some figures on that. But for Elemis wines, for my style of red wines, I really enjoy making lighter style red wines. And people often think if they hear lighter style reds, they think that the wines are going to be lean and insipid. But I want to show people that you can have wines that are lighter in style, more delicate, but that are still complex and nuanced. And that complexity and nuance comes from the vineyard sites where the grapes are sourced from. So I think Cinsault is a variety that really lends itself to a lighter style of red wine. So that's why I decided to make Cinsault. And I also work with the old vineyard that was planted in the early 70s in Darling. And I specifically choose to work with Cinsault from Darling because I feel that, Darling is obviously a very hot area. It gets really hot in the morning, but it's 12 kilometers to the ocean as the crow flies. So every afternoon, around midday, there's a cool breeze coming through the property. And for me, that combination of warmth in the morning gives you sort of the really fruit, that cherry, Turkish delight, rhubarb character in the wine. And then that cool weather that you have in the afternoon gives you a little bit more spice. So that's complexity that purely comes from the vineyard site. That's not from my winemaking in the cellar.
It's the standard winemaker approach of not wanting to take credit for anything, which is not entirely true because without your touch, the wine wouldn't be what it is. And I'm interested in that touch because although you ascribe many of the qualities of the wine to what comes out of the vineyard, it's still got to be made into the wine that we drink and love by somebody. And in this case, that is you. What are the challenges, other than waiting for the vineyards to be old enough to get the best out of them, that making a Cinsault presents to you as a winemaker?
For me, the biggest part is deciding when to pick, to be honest. That's always, for me, the trickiest thing. It's an old vineyard, so there's a little bit of unevenness in the vineyard. So some vines are a little bit more exposed. The fruit's a little bit more exposed because the canopies are less dense, and other vines, the canopies are a little bit more dense. So there's this kind of variation in the vineyard. And for me, that's always the tricky part, is to actually decide when is the right moment to pick. But the winemaking for me is quite simple. I do 100% whole bunch fermentation on the grapes. Because it's dryland farmed and it's quite a warm area, the stems are always quite dry. And I really like whole bunch fermentations. There's always a little bit of spiciness and pepperiness that you get from it. And it also doesn't extract too much. So the tannins are very delicate in that sense. But yeah, I think for me, it's kind of the trickiest part is managing the fermentation, decide how much to extract or not to extract, and then picking. And sometimes it's also variety that can have a high pH, which is quite tricky to deal with in the cellar.
I see amongst our many guests who are watching the show, Derek Pratt-Jones was watching and immediately exclaimed with military delight, as Derek would, "Break a leg, Geronimo," which takes us into one of the wines that really does lead this category, along with the wines of Lucinda. Lukas van Loggerenbergs have swept us along on this delight of Cinsault. That Break a Leg Geronimo's got plenty of fans. Lukas, what was the aha moment for you when you discovered that not only was Cinsault something you could have some fun with, but something that you could turn into some really, really good quality wine?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I think my first exposure was, I grew up in Rawsonville, which is, as everyone knows, a massive area for bulk wine production. And after school, I did 2 harvests at Dashboard, it's now part of the Uni Wine Group. And I think a big reason why there's so many old Cinsaults is it's actually quite a good grape for making base wine, for making brandy. And it's quite a generous grape, so the farmers get nice yields, it's big bunches. And I always say it's the farm workers, it's their favorite grape to pick because it tastes like a table grape. It's by far the most delicious wine grape to eat. And then I think in the cellar, just the whole cellar smells like a florist shop, just this rose petals, potpourri. And I think my first realization, except from just tipping and processing all these massive tons of Cinsault for making base wine for brandy, was probably after Elsenburg, when you get to drink those old Stellenbosch blends. And I'm blessed that I'm very good friends with the Winshaws, and I've probably had 5-6 times Chateau Libertas 57. And I had a discussion with Michael Friedjon last year when we released our new vintage, and we tasted the Geronimo and Liter, and he's 99% certain that the 57 Libertas must be 100% Cinsault, which is kind of mind-boggling because when you taste that wine, it's 60, almost 70 years old. It's just this proper blue violets, blue fruit, and the wine still can go for many years. And so, yeah, when we decided to do our own stuff in 2015, 2016, Geronimo did really well for us. The get-go was to work with Cinsault from Stellenbosch. I know everyone talks about ocean influence, but the farm where our Cinsault comes from is probably the closest Cinsaults to the ocean in the Cape. It's 4 kilometers at least as the crow flies from the ocean. So we get this much more thicker skins on our Cinsaults there. It's much cooler. The southeaster is constantly blowing, so our canopies are quite smaller than other places. And I think a big distinction of my Cinsaults is the salinity on the palate, and that's, I think, a big part of the terroir. And yeah, I always wanted to do Cinsault that had a bit of gravitas. Back then, like Lucinda said, I was afraid of people stereotyping Cinsault, where it's something that you drink ice cold in the swimming pool, and when you're finished, you throw the bottle over the neighbor's wall. I wanted to do something that had this beautiful sex appeal to it, but it should also be able to go with fine food. And yeah, it's just a magical grape. I think the only downfall of this vintage is just the tonnages. I think the old vineyards that we work with are 50% down, 24 vintage. There's not going to be a lot of them out there.
It's hard enough to get hold of wines like Lukas's already without hearing news like that. I see Lisa Harlow's watching the show, talked about having the 2017 Geronimo. Maras is watching as well. Hello, Martin Lamprecht, and Morgan Stain watching from De Grendel, and Jolande Fouchy from Woman and Wolf. So some great characters of the South African wine world watching on. And no doubt because this is such an exciting part of the South African wine conversation at the moment, Lukas, where there's so much stuff we know we can make and we have made for years and years and years. But I guess for winemakers, for people like yourself, when you discover the potential of something new like you have in Cinsault, it just put another skip in your step and drops another gear on the winemaking process.
Yeah, exactly. It's I think a big discussion at the moment is no one is planting Cinsaults, and I think. Going forward, these older vineyards aren't going to be there for much longer. I think the big balance that one has to get right is using the younger vineyards for maybe rosé, which I'm a massive fan of. I think Cinsault is one of the 3 noble rosé varieties. And yeah, I think the future for Cinsault is definitely growing, especially with winemakers traveling a lot more and putting a lot more emphasis in the vineyards. And yeah, can't wait to see what's going to happen the next 5 years.
Nor can the rest of us as this continues to take shape. We are still hoping that Donovan and Rall will be able to join us, but this is a tricky time for our winemakers to be on the show, given the demands of harvest. We will keep you posted. But in the interim, let's head back to Malu and get some context on Lucinda and on the wines of Lukas as well. When you sat down to try all of this Cinsault, to write this Decanter report, Malu, what was the framing when you kicked off? What were you anticipating? What were you looking out for? And were you surprised, even though I'm sure you'd had plenty of Cinsault by then, at the sheer extent of the quality that you were confronted by?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is why I do this job. I can't, the privilege of being able to taste that amount of wine and just journey through premium Cinsault in a single tasting was really quite incredible. And as for my selection process, I try to balance it in terms of different styles and different expressions. So, for example, there's a Kleine Salza Project Z in there, which is 11.5 alcohol. And they did this by draining off the must before fermentation. So you get all that fruit, but at such low alcohol. And I thought that was quite interesting. So I wanted to put that in there, for example. The Lotte, sorry, Lukas, I would call it the Lotte Vineyard, Engelsman, gives you black fruit, which is so attractive in a Cinsault. You get some dark cherries. I thought that was really interesting. And I love Lucinda's kind of sappy, spicy, lightweight and modern approach. And this is what you'll find. The thread that drew all the wines together was that the winemaking techniques were invariably modern. They were all modern in some way. There was hardly a fuddy-duddy on the table. They were all light-handed, a lot of whole bunch pressing, minimal oak, a lot of concrete, light featherweight tannins, and moderate alcohols. And I think that not only speaks to the current wave South Africa is riding, but also globally it speaks to consumer trends of still wanting to drink wine, but not wanting to be hit over the head with one, being able to have a Cinsault at lunch and, another one at supper because the alcohol's moderate enough. And as you mentioned in the beginning, Dan, popping it into the fridge for a little while and you have it lovely and chilled and it shines up that beautiful red fruit. So I think it's a great expression of where South Africa is in terms of its modern new way of winemaking. And as I said, globally, it's exactly what people want to drink and how they want to drink.
If you weren't already wanting a glass of Cinsault when the show started, I think Malu's got you dashing for your cellar, or if not, to Norman Goodfellows as quickly as possible. There are plenty of people watching. Corbus on sale watching from Fancourt. Corbus, lovely having you on the show. And Mark Radcliffe from his mansion somewhere in the Hamptons. He's got a proper job in his spare time. Does great work for the Berkeley team. Lovely to have you watching the show as well, Mark. I want to come back to Malu on some of the geography of our Cinsault and how different parts of the country are reflected. But we can go to a part of the country we haven't been to yet, and that is the home of Mr. Donovan Rall, because he's come in from his time out in the harvest and is joining us. Donovan, lovely to have you on. Let's get a quick harvest update then, as you've charged straight in. How are things looking in the Rall Empire for this harvest?
Dan, to be honest, it's been pretty brutal, but we are surviving. I mean, as I sit here, it's still 38 degrees at 5:30 in the afternoon. Before it turns to raisins. So it's been a very early one. It's been a good one, smaller crop. Quality looks fantastic though. So very happy from this side.
Tell me about the Cinsault in particular, because that is the grape we're discussing today. We've already heard from both Lucinda and from Lukas, as well as from Malu, about the excitement that this grape produces, both for those of us who get to drink it and those of you who get to make it and drink it. And it's caught the imagination on both sides of that divide over the last few years. What has it been about Cinsault for you, Donovan, that's got you so excited, that's got you charging in to produce what is, even by your very high standards, a particularly good wine?
Well, I mean, Cinsault to me has always been our answer to things like Gamay, wines that are incredibly fresh, that can be drank slightly chilled even, but still have amazing complexity. I mean, we're blessed with so many old vineyards of Cinsault. I mean, I've always seen it to sort of the red partner to Shannon. We have these libraries of old vines everywhere. still mostly being unutilized. Maybe going into bigger blends, blending away with some younger vines. We have absolutely fantastic vineyards in all parts of the winelands. I mean, be it Swartland, be it Stellenbosch, being up north. There's so many great Cinsault vineyards to still be discovered. And I just think it's our answer to something lighter, something a little bit brighter, lots of beautiful red fruit, just a lighter red style to drink. I mean, if you're sitting here where I am and it's 38 degrees at almost 6 o'clock at night, you're probably not going to go for a big red. A nice glass of chilled Cinsault would do. So yeah, that's how I've always seen it. I think we've only touched base on what we can actually do with Cinsault in this country. It's so diverse. I mean, I'm making pet nut from it. I'm making a concrete version of it. I'll use it in a blend because it can lower the alcohol of the bigger blends. I even make a white Cinsault. Yeah, so Cinsault is going to play a big part in Rall wines in the future.
All right, well, you're going to start adding those to your cellars if you can. Become good friends with Derek at Great Domains. But the only way you'll get your hands on the very sought-after Donovan Rall wines, which, like our other Cinsault, come from very specific parts of South Africa. And mainly that idea of a South African wine, I think, has largely been dispensed with around the world. Most people are understanding that South Africa is such a varied country with such unique and individual terroir. How does that sense of terroir talk to the Cinsault we are producing? From the vast research that you did, were you getting a real feel that certain parts of South Africa are delivering a very distinct style?
Yes, the Cape. Sorry, I'm not myself, but yeah, it's the Cape is the province that generally makes the wine. We have some, plantings in KwaZulu-Natal, etc., but it's all happening here in the Cape. And in terms of plantings, the Breedekloof and Paarl have the majority of the plantings, and that's because, as Lukas mentioned earlier, it's bulk history with Cinsault and Shen in particular. And yes, I mentioned Dashbosch Wines, which is an amazing it's an amazing brand that celebrates these historical kind of small vineyard plots within their bigger portfolio, which is uni wines. So Paarl and Breedekloof in terms of planting, but in terms of old vine and premium bottlings, Stellenbosch, Swartland, and Darling. I'm so glad Darling was mentioned earlier. It's where Donovan's Cinsault comes from. This is where Lucinda's Cinsault comes from. And there's just something magical about it. I mean, I tried a few others in the range. There's Savages Follow the Line. It's from this isolated Cinsault plot. Francois Haasbroek makes his Cinsault from Darling. It's really quite special, and people that get their hands on these. Of course, Alex Milner, who's something of the unsung king of Cinsault, and a bit of a specialist. He makes three. He makes a coastal Cinsault, which is various Western Cape. He makes a Darling Cinsault, and he makes a Stellenbosch Cinsault. Normally, his Darling is my absolute favorite Cinsault in the country or in the Cape. But for this tasting, I actually preferred the Stellenbosch. Stellenbosch is making some very, very good Cinsault. So those are the areas to look to.
All right. Seems like we all have some work to do on discovering all of this marvelous Cinsault. Let's have a look at specifically our three producers today. Let's kick off with Donovan. And for you, Malu, what is it about Donovan's Cinsault, about the wine he produces, the approach and the style that he gives us that makes it so special?
Well, it just amazes me how, Donovan is this giant of a guy, and he's got these big, big hands. And he just produces these wines of absolute delicacy and intricacy. I really find that quite special. And he's perfected the art of gentle extraction there and shined up luminous fruit. So his wines are pure and delicate and intricate, and are just absolutely delicious and modern.
All right, so you've got a pretty high-profile member of your fan club there, Donovan. Talk us through, in response to that, your approach to Cinsault, to getting it right, to getting the very best out of the grapes, but also in a style that you feel says, yes, this is the big friendly giant of the Swartland.
Well, to me, where my Cinsault plots are, it's mostly quite rich clay soils, lots of coffee clip, lots of sort of ferrocrete, very iron-driven soils, and usually they have potential for making very big wines. If you have Syrah on those same soils, you'll make monstrous wines, very tannic, very structured wines. But with Cinsault, being these massive berries, big bunches, to give you an idea, the Syrah I harvested today, a full crate weighs about 14 to 15 kilograms. With the Cinsault, we fill it with probably 6 or 7 or 8 bunches, and that same crate will weigh about 22 kilograms. So it's really these massive berries, and to me, in that part on those clay soils, you don't have to extract too much. You almost can't over extract. I get the grapes in, we stomp it as hard as we can to get some juice flowing through the ferment, and we do a semi-carbonic maceration. Cinsault ferments incredibly fast. So, it's usually 5 to 6 days on the skins, and then we press it. So, there's no extended maceration, there's no cold soak. I think in doing it this way, you get a very perfumed wine, a very lightly structured wine. But because we are working with older vineyards, you still get a beautifully complex wine. And that's the beauty of Cinsault to me. It's something that's light. It can have alcohol. Wine usually has between 12 and 13, never more than that. So you really make a light, delicate wine, but with real intensity still, and with amazing aromatics. And that's the beauty of Cinsault from that part of Darling, I think.
It's also another endorsement beyond just Cinsault of that Darling region as a whole, which is increasingly becoming the supplier of some really good South African grapes, some of which might make some other Cinsaults. And before the show is done, Donovan, I'll give you some time to think about it, but I am going to ask you for 1 or 2 other examples of Cinsault that you feel we should look out for our research. While you think about those, let's go back to the person who has done the research, and we've got Lukas back. So Malu, give us an introduction. Lukas van Loggerenberg is really one of the stars of Cinsault in South Africa. What is it for him that really stands out to you?
So he's got 2 wonderful Cinsaults, the Lotte and the Geronimo, both from old wine sites. As we mentioned, the Lotte is from the second oldest vineyard in the country. But I think I'll speak about the Geronimo because I think it's maybe people can buy that one. I don't know, very popular wines. But the Geronimo for me is just this absolute incredible balance of really kind of bright red fruit and this absolute dryness. It just balances on this perfect platform of dryness, and I think he's just got it so correct. So you get all that lovely red berried fruit and an appetizing dryness right throughout. It's wine for grown-ups. It is delicious.
As opposed to wine for kids, but we'll leave that for a different show. Lukas, the style that you produce, how much do you get to dictate, or are you purely taking what's on offer and making the best of what that terroir has guided you towards?
Yeah, I think if you give the vineyard and the farmer the chance to shine, I think the end result will always be much better than trying to force a style in the cellar. As I said, we're really blessed that, especially with Geronimo, those old vineyards were Marseille selections that was created by the Bredel brothers, and they used to make a lot of port. And Bernard Bredel, who I think makes some of the best Cinsaults in the country, said that his grandfather used those specific vineyards of Cinsault in his ports as well, which just added this beautiful fruit and flesh to the end product. And then with those really soft granitic soils, you get this beautiful focused tannin. And I think, concur with Malu, I'm a big advocate for dry wines. I think a lot of red wines, especially from New World countries, have this massive fruit sweetness on the palate. And luckily, I don't know why, but my reds in my cellar ferment to under 2 grams a liter. So I like that dryness on the wine, the residual sugar, because it brings Cinsault having a lot of perfume and fruit on the nose and palate. That dry residual sugar just brings everything to a point. And then I'm a very lazy winemaker. You can ask Donovan. We do on all our reds just 1 pump over in the morning. And so we give the vineyard and the soil to determine the tannin structure. The only difference that what I do is once my wines are fermented dry, we keep them for maybe another week on the skins, just to get a bit more tannin extraction. But you have to be very gentle with that. And then our wines just age in big 500-liter French oak barrels. And I think a big thing for me that I found it really helpful was we press our Cinsaults probably 2 months. We bottle them 2 months earlier than all the other reds. I want to capture that crunchiness that Cinsault has. It must feel like you're biting into a pomegranate. And so, that's fascinating, because even with Liter, which is a humble experience to be working with such an old vineyard, we do exactly the same fermentation style, no yeast, no enzymes. And you can get to taste the influence that the 90-year-old vineyard has. But I think mostly important is the influence that those iron-rich soils up in the mountain in Franschhoek has on the tannin on the wine.
I will only take issue with one thing, the suggestion you're a very lazy winemaker. I'm not sure such a thing exists, and it's certainly not you yourself, Lukas. And the results reveal that on an annual basis as more and more wine comes out, and far, far less of it is freely available, because Lukas's wines are in hot demand. Cinsault amongst them. Malu, our third and final winemaking guest on the show, is Lucinda. Again, part of this sprawling piece you did for Decanter. What was the star attraction here?
So, first of all, I wanted to highlight Lucinda because I think she really caught my attention at the Chenin Blanc International Congress, which happened last year, the year before, I don't know, but somewhere there. She captivates me with her brilliant mind, and I think she's quite analytical and cerebral, and I really enjoyed her talk. And after that, I sought out her wines, and they turned out to be as cerebral as she is. And the Cinsault has also been handled very delicately, hands-off approach. I mean, it's whole bunch, as she mentioned, and I think about 6 months in old oak. So it's very much, it's the expression of the varietal, and lovely crunchy acid, which Lukas mentioned, and also a fantastic perfume. And, you know, we talk often, well, we don't talk often enough maybe, but we do talk about Pinotage's perfume. Like, you can walk into a cellar and it smells like a Turkish bazaar, like rose water and orange peel and all these things. And I'm of the assumption that that perfume probably comes from its Cinsault parentage. And I think that's what Lucinda's wine gives me.
All right. Again, we've got some very high praise indeed, Lucinda, this time for your wine. The approach that you take, the style that you make. Give us your understanding of what that balance is between you trying to tell Cinsault what to do and Cinsault deciding what it wants to do.
Well, I think we would love to every year be able to tell the wine what to do, but we deal with nature, and every season is different. The vines behave differently every year, and that's one of the reasons why I really enjoy working with the same vineyards every year. I've always worked since 2015 with this one single vineyard for my Cinsault, because you kind of also, we try to think that we eventually understand the vineyard and how it behaves differently every year, depending on what nature gives us. So for me, it really is, I also feel like a lazy winemaker listening to Lukas, because it really, for me, the grapes come in a whole bunch. They go into an open top fermenter. I also do 1 pump over a day and work very delicately with the fruit. And then I'll, after primary fermentation, maybe give some extended maceration depending on what the tannins are tasting like. So that's really something that I kind of play by ear depending on the vintage. And I keep after pressing, I just take the wine to older oak, and then it's ages in old oak for about 6 months. So I also bottle relatively soon after harvest, usually max 6 to 8 months that the wine spends in barrel before bottling, because I really want to maintain that freshness. And what I just really love about the Cinsault is it's a variety that gives you a lot. You can make a lower alcohol wine and it's still complex, it's nuanced, it's layered. Like I explained earlier, this vineyard gives me these amazing Turkish delights, floral aspects. But then at the same time, you've got this sort of Parma ham flavor, savoriness towards the end. And I just think it's a really great wine to enjoy. I always tell people to slightly chill the wine. Often people drink these wines too warm because it really accentuates the aromatics in the wine a lot more. And yeah, I just think it's a fantastic wine to enjoy. If you are not necessarily a red wine drinker, then I often tell, because I'll often be at tastings and people will tell me, oh, but I'm not really a red wine drinker. And then I'll tell them, well, this is kind of the gateway drug to red wine drinking, because these wines are really delicate and interesting. It's a great alternative for summer to have at lunchtime if you're a red wine drinker. So yeah, I think it's just a very versatile grape that I'm really fond of.
Cinsault is the gateway to red. I love that way of phrasing it. You mentioned that you get it in quite early. You talk about the freshness. You talk about the youthfulness. We've also, though, on the show had Lukas talking about a 57 Chateau Libertas that he and Michael Freejohn are both fairly certain was 100% Cinsault, which suggests Cinsault does have potential in terms of the wine you're making, the Cinsault that you're seeing on the South African market at the moment. It's certainly very appealing to drink it young and fresh and full of life, and that light red fruit that, especially in the warmer months, is so appealing. But is yours wine, is South African Cinsault as a whole, do you feel, that's being made at the moment wine that we can set aside for a lot longer than we might initially think?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, the oldest Cinsault that I have tasted some of the old Chateau Libertas wines, but I also distinctly remember tasting a 1984 KWV Cinsault, and I was also pleasantly surprised with how well the wine aged. And I remember when I started making wine and people tasted my wines for the first time, the first thing that they say is, oh, this is a light style of wine. It's very nice, but, you've got to drink this within a year. This is not something that you really want to keep. And I've started opening up some of my first vintages, the 2015s, 2016s, and I'm actually amazed with how they've aged. They're kind of a little bit reminiscent of Pinot Noir. So I'm very excited to see how the Cinsauts that we're making now age, because I really think there is, just because they're lighter in style does not mean that they don't have the ability to age.
And I think that's perhaps the final endorsement that is needed of Cinsault for the people who may dismiss it as being something a little light and frivolous, that the lightness is there, but there is still an intensity and a robust nature to the wine that will allow it to go on longer. And again, this is so often the case. The only challenge is not drinking the wine, so you can keep it and drink it at a later stage. I did say I'd ask our winemakers for another Cinsault or two to recommend. Let's head back to Donovan first of all. Your own Cinsault is sensational, certainly. What are one or two others that people might not have encountered, might not have experienced, that you think we should have a look out for, Donovan?
Well, if you're interested in seeing sort of where my Cinsault is from, that area, I would think Peter Walser makes a beautiful version. Francois Haasbroek, like you mentioned before, definitely seek his out. And Jan de Deer, interestingly enough, releases some of his Cinsault a little bit later. So, I mean, touching on the point of aging Cinsault, his Verdans from Daring, maybe that's something to try out with 2-3 years of age already when you buy it, and that wine just becomes better with age. It's a beautiful wine. So yeah, those are my recommendations from that area. But Cinsault, if you think 10 years back, there might have been 5 or 6 or 7. If you look on the shelves now, it's becoming much more popular, and obviously a lot of people have caught on to it. So try as many as you can. I try as many different ones as I can from as many different regions. I think it's such an undiscovered grape still, and it's going to become a big part of our future, hopefully. So.
Okay, we'll add those to the list. I think Was it? It might have been Greg Sherwood was saying something about Ian Nordia. I'm not sure if he's mentioned his wine before, but maybe it was him who was talking about it as well. I see a few people making some comments in there on Instagram. Mark Ratcliffe talking about how they don't see quite so much since over in America. Well, we'll have to send some the way of America in that case. Derek Pratt-Jones was agreeing with something that Malu said. I'm not sure what, but thanks, Derek, for joining in there as well. And David mentioning some Native Valley wines as well. This Cinsault Sweep is a really, really exciting one. I know Lukas has been having one or two connection troubles. Let's see if we can get back to him. Lukas, some Cinsault recommendations from you, if you can hear me. Can you hear us there, Lukas? Oh, unfortunately, we couldn't hear Lukas back, so we'll try and get him back in a second. While we do that, let's fire the same question off to Lucinda. Many people admiring your wines, Lucinda. What are these Cinsault examples that get you excited?
Oh gosh, there's actually quite a few. If I can just think off the top of my head, I'm also quite a big fan of the Blackwater Cinsault by Francois Hosbrook. I really love the Cinsault from City on a Hill as well. I think Ian Sommeik makes a very interesting one too. Yeah, those are just some that come off the top of my mind. And then Bernard Bredal, who's is also fantastic.
And we were hoping to have Bernard on the show, but he is one of many people who is juggling a harvest at the moment. And so we'll have to have him on the show very soon indeed. Let's have one last crack quickly at Lukas and see if there is any luck. Lukas, if you can hear me, let's see if we can hear you back. A couple of Cinsault recommendations, if you will.
Yes. Stellenbosch, definitely Bernard Bredal. And then the Cravens. I think the Cravens make, for me, probably one of my most enjoyable drinking Cinsauts. It's just honest and crunchy and a great capture of a vintage normally. And then Alex Milner, I think the effort that he's put into Cinsault is unparalleled. And then obviously the greats, Duncan and Eben. So there's just so many good Cinsauts out there, and I think they're not breaking the wallet as compared to other red, delicate varieties like Pinot and so on.
All right, this list of Cinsault we need to try getting longer and longer and longer. Cantea Pele also watching, and saying she's tried some great Cinsault as well of late. It's been a really cool conversation. I want to cap it off in just a second with Malu, who inspired the topic for the show with that wonderful article in Decanter, which you can still find over on the Decanter website when you have a moment. Before we do get a final word for you on that, no, Malu, I was very worried that you didn't have enough to do because you were only judging 8 wine shows a week and writing a dozen articles and appearing all over the place. You've added yet something else to your list of stuff to do, but this one does sound particularly cool. The new Fine Wine Challenge with American Express. And I mean, you pretty much run every tasting or judging you go to anyway, whether you're supposed to or not. But this time you're actually supposed to be in charge as opposed to just taking over.
Well, it's quite exciting for me to not have to taste a bajillion wines as the chairperson of the event. I just get to taste the tippy top, which I'm very delighted about. And that's why I've had to make this move. I can't be tasting 1,000 wines every day anymore. So yeah, it's the Fine Wine Awards by American Express. There's a website up, finewineawards.coza. Go take a look into your wine. What I'm quite excited about is we're going to have obviously seasoned judges, but I'm also going to use this opportunity as an incubator for young up-and-coming tasting talents, because we don't have enough of that. It's very difficult sometimes to break through the ranks, and I've made so many great palates along the way, and I'd like to invite these guys in and have some fun.
All right, so look out for some of that young and up-and-coming talent, people like Angela Lloyd, Winnie Bowman, Michael Fridjon, Fiona McDonald, It's a really exciting edition, Malu, and I'm really happy for you. I think it's going to add a welcome dimension to our South African fine wine appreciation, and we'll be keeping a close eye on that on the show. We'll also be keeping a close eye on Cinsault in closing, which leaves me with a devil's advocate question to toss your way, Malu, and that is around Cinsault and its longevity, not in terms of how long the wine itself will last, because that's been proven, but rather how much of a flash in the pan this might be. And I say that not to dismiss any of the wonderful Cinsault, but we do get so many amazing grapes, so many fantastic discoveries. There's a new Greek grape varietal going in here, or there's a new version of a Mourvedre coming out there, and there is just so much being thrown at us in the wine world. Is Cinsault here to stay for the long run, or is it going to be under pressure to keep this status and not just be a few season wonder?
It's a tricky one because, tasting these, almost 100 Cinsauts for this article, I could definitely see the qualities there and that distinctness, that South Africanness that calls to mind our distinct Chenin, for example. So as a calling card for South Africa, 100%. But the facts are plantings have dropped by almost 500 hectares in the last couple of years. And it goes back to that it's a difficult grape to grow. It might give you high yields, but you need to control those yields. And to control those yields, you need to canopy management. And this is why, all Cinsault is basically bush vine, is to try and limit the vigor. The big berries, the big leaves are prone to sunburn. It's a tricky grape. So people don't want to spend the money in planting it. And certainly don't want to wait 30 years until they can make a fine wine from it. So I love Lukas's suggestion of making rosé in the meantime. I think rosé is becoming more and more popular. And I think that's a very good idea to kind of keep Cinsault going. So to answer your question, Dan, no, I don't think it's going to go anywhere. And yes, I think it's going to remain interesting, but we have to all go out there and drink it to keep people planting it. So do read the article. Every Cinsault that was mentioned here by every winemaker is on that list. So I think I chose well because they're all there. So go have a look, go drink those. Living in Sin.
Of course, what it probably means is Malu briefed everybody on the show beforehand to make sure they repeated exactly what she'd said, and they've done so dutifully. Guys, thank you. That was not just a terrific celebration of Cinsault, but a wonderful call to action to go out and discover it and to drink it and to buy more of it and to have fun with it, because clearly in making it, or in your case, mainly writing about it and researching it, you guys are having so much fun. So it's pretty certain that we're going to have exactly the same when we get stuck into it. So thank you all, Donovan, Lukas, Lucinda in particular, because I know you guys are in a rather busy time of the year for winemakers. So much, much appreciated. Thank you for some great wine. Malu, as always, thank you for inspiring a great idea for a show, and best of luck with the new fine wine space, which is a really, really exciting one. I'm off to find some Cinsault because it's Monday and I'm thirsty, and I shall raise a glass to all four of you. Thank you for joining us on the show, and we look forward to having you all back again soon.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers. Thanks, Anne.
There we go. Lucinda Heyns, Illimus Wines, Lukas van Loggerenberg, the wines of Lukas van Loggerenberg, Donovan Rall and Rall Wines, and the Louis Roederer Emerging Young Wine Writer of the Year, Malu Lambert, amongst her 3 or 4 dozen titles, combining to give us some insight into a grape that really is as exciting as any in South Africa at the moment, not just now, but as it ages and develops and becomes something even more special, another calling card for South Africa to proudly call its own. That wraps us up for today. We say goodbye to Cinsault and say hello to Sauvignon Blanc on Thursday, something a few more of you have probably drunk a little more of. It's the middle of Sauvignon Blanc season. In fact, I'm pretty certain that there are a couple of estates who've got their 2024 out and on shelves by now. We'll talk about Sauvignon Blanc and the growth thereof on Thursday's show. Until then, do yourself a favor, head over to Decanter, have a read of that article by Malu, and complete your Cinsault education. That does it for today. Big thank you for joining us on Dan Really Likes Wine, brought to you by Norman Goodfellows. We'll see you again on Thursday. Goodbye.